Hey, tonight we're diving into ancient Rome, but not the glamorous side with fancy togas and magnificent buildings you might be thinking about. We're going to explore something much more real, what life was like for the countless slaves who formed the backbone of that mighty civilization. Get comfortable, maybe dim the lights a bit, and perhaps have a warm drink nearby. This journey might make you appreciate your comfortable bed and freedom more than ever before. Congratulations, you've just woken up in ancient Rome, somewhere around the 1st century AD. The good news is, you're alive in one of history's most fascinating empires. The bad news? You're a slave, one of the estimated 5 to 10 million unfree people, making up roughly 1/3 of the Roman population. The first rays of dawn barely filter through the small, high window of the cramped room where you've been sleeping. Your body aches from lying on the hard floor with nothing but a thin straw mat between you and the cold stone. Around you, several others stir from their own fitful sleep. There's no privacy here, no personal space, just bodies sharing warmth through the chilly night. Get up now. A harsh voice shatters the quiet morning. Your overseer, a freedman who earned his liberty years ago, stands at the doorway with a wooden rod in his hand. You've seen that rod at work before, a reminder that your body isn't your own, and hesitation comes with a price. Your stomach growls as you rise. The evening meal yesterday was just a small portion of porridge and a piece of stale bread. If you're lucky, you might get something similar today. The average slave diet isn't about pleasure or nutrition. It's about keeping you alive and working, nothing more. As you shuffle outside with the others, you get a glimpse of the villa's main house where your master lives. It's beautiful, with colorful murals on the walls and open courtyards filled with statues and plants. You've cleaned those rooms, polished those statues, but never as a guest. Always as property. You, the new one. The overseer points his rod at you. Master purchased you at the market yesterday. What skills do you have? And don't lie, he'll find out, and then you'll wish you'd never been born. This is the moment of truth. Your fate in this ancient world depends largely on your perceived value. The hierarchy of Roman slavery is complex, with vast differences between the lives of different types of slaves. If you're educated and literate, especially if you know Greek, you might become a household tutor, teaching the master's children. You could be a secretary, managing correspondence and accounts. These positions come with better food, better treatment, and a much higher chance of eventually earning your freedom. If you have craft skills, perhaps as a baker, metal worker, or weaver, you might work in a workshop in the city. Urban slaves often live slightly better lives than their rural counterparts, with more opportunities to earn a peculium, a small sum of money that might one day buy your freedom. But if you have no special skills, your future looks bleak. You might be sent to work the master's fields, where dawn to dusk labor under the hot Mediterranean sun awaits. Or worse, you could be sold to the mines, where the average slave survived only a few months in the dark, dusty tunnels, chained and working until collapse. I can read and write, you stammer, hoping this might save you from the worst fates. I know some numbers too. The overseer looks skeptical. We'll see about that. For now, you'll help in the kitchen. Malia. He calls to an older woman carrying water. Take this one to Servius in the kitchen. Tell him it's the master's new purchase. Malia, her hands rough from years of work and her face lined with the weariness of servitude, nods and gestures for you to follow. As you walk through the servants' corridors of the villa, she speaks in a low voice. Keep your head down and work hard, she advises. The master here isn't the cruelest, but don't mistake that for kindness. Remember, we're not people to them. We're tools, property, just like their cups and furniture. "How long have you been here?" you ask. 20 years, she replies. "I was captured when the Romans conquered my village in Gaul. I was 16. My whole family was sold at different markets. I never saw any of them again." She says this matter-of-factly, the pain long dulled by time. "Do you think I could ever be free?" you whisper. She gives you a long look. "Some get lucky. The master might free you in his will, or you might save enough to buy your freedom. But don't count on it. Most of us die as we lived, as slaves." Her words sit heavy in your chest as you enter the steamy kitchen where Servius, a pot-bellied man with burn scars on his forearms, barks orders at several harried-looking slaves preparing the morning meal for the master's family. "Another one? Fine, fine. You, stoke the fires. Keep them hot, but not too hot. Burn the master's bread, and you'll feel the whip before midday." You're handed a poker and pointed toward the brick ovens along the wall. The heat hits you like a wall as you approach, sweat immediately beading on your forehead. This is considered one of the better slave positions, yet the conditions would be deemed intolerable by any modern workplace standard. As you work, you listen to the conversations around you, trying to understand this new world. The slaves talk in hushed tones about various members of the household, which ones are cruel, which ones might slip you extra food, which ones have wandering hands that you should avoid at all costs. "Did you hear about Demetrius?" one young woman whispers, as she kneads dough. "The master's secretary." "What about him?" replies another, chopping vegetables with practiced speed. "He's being manumitted next month, on the master's birthday, after 15 years of service." The news creates a ripple of reactions: envy, hope, resentment. Freedom is the dream that keeps many slaves going, despite the crushing reality that most will never achieve it. 15 years, murmurs an older man sorting lentils nearby. And even then, he'll still be bound to the master as his patron. Freedom has its own chains in Rome. This is something you hadn't considered. Even freed slaves' liberty remain tied to their former masters through obligations of service and loyalty. Complete independence is rare, almost impossible. The morning passes in a blur of heat, smoke, and unfamiliar tasks. Your hands, unused to such labor, blister and burn. Your back aches from bending over the fires, but you dare not complain or slow down. The ever-present threat of punishment looms over every slave in this household. During a brief lull, you ask Servius about the collars some slaves wear, metal bands around their necks that look painfully heavy. "Those are for runners," he explains grimly. "Try to escape, and that's what awaits you, if you're caught alive. The collar marks you forever as a flight risk, sometimes with inscriptions offering rewards for your return. The thought of wearing such a device, such a visible symbol of your status as property, makes your skin crawl. Yet the alternative, attempting escape without planning or knowledge of this ancient world, seems equally hopeless. The boy from the stables tried to run last month, adds a thin girl carrying a water jug. They caught him at the city gates. The master had him crucified as an example. Crucifixion, the most infamous of Roman punishments, reserved for slaves and the worst criminals. Death on a cross, slow and agonizing, your body displayed as a warning to others. The casual way she mentions this fate tells you everything about how cheaply slave lives are valued here. By midday, you've made your first mistakes, burning your arm on the oven, dropping a clay bowl that shattered on the floor. Each error earned you a sharp blow from Servius and promises of worse if you don't improve quickly. You'll learn or you'll suffer, he tells you matter-of-factly. That's the only choice slaves get to make. As the household breaks for the midday meal, you're given your portion, a small bowl of beans and grain, with a piece of bread much coarser than what was served to the master's family. Still, you devour it, recognizing that maintaining your strength is your only defense against the demands of this new life. While you eat in the corner of the kitchen with the other slaves, the conversation turns to rumors about the different types of slave work throughout Rome. Someone mentions the mines, and a collective shudder passes through the group. "My cousin was sent to the silver mines in Hispania," one man says quietly. "No one ever comes back from there. They work until they die, chained in darkness. The average life expectancy is measured in months, not years." Another speaks of the farms. "Field work is brutal too. Under the sun all day, no shelter, and the overseers are merciless. At least here, we have walls around us and regular meals." "The worst is the gladiator schools," offers a scarred man who rarely speaks. "I was nearly sold to one before coming here. They train you to die beautifully for the crowd's entertainment. You listen, mapping the hierarchy of slave life in your mind. Household slaves in wealthy homes occupy the upper tiers, especially those with specialized skills like accounting, medicine, or education. Urban slaves working in shops or businesses come next, followed by the vast numbers of agricultural slaves. At the bottom are those in the mines, quarries, and gladiatorial schools, places where a slave's life expectancy could be measured in heartbeats rather than years. The most startling realization is how normalized this system is. No one around you questions the fundamental injustice of slavery itself. It's simply the way the world works. Some are born free, others are not, and fortune can change a person's status in an instant. A free person can become enslaved through war, debt, or criminal punishment. A slave can, though rarely, rise to freedom through manumission. The afternoon brings new tasks. You're sent to help clean the triclinium, the dining room where the master entertains guests. Here, you get your first direct glimpse of your owner, a middle-aged man in a pristine toga discussing business with visitors. He doesn't look cruel or monstrous. He looks ordinary, which somehow makes the reality of your situation even more disturbing. He briefly glances at you, eyes passing over your form as one might assess a new piece of furniture before returning to his conversation. To him, you're not a person with hopes and fears. You are an investment, a walking tool to perform tasks that enhance his comfort and status. As you clean, moving as quietly as possible to avoid drawing attention, you hear snatches of their conversation, discussions of politics, business ventures, and, most disturbingly, casual talk about the purchase of new slaves for various purposes. "I recently acquired an excellent Greek tutor for my son," says one guest, sipping wine from a silver cup that you'll later be responsible for cleaning. "Cost more than I'd have liked, but educated slaves are worth the investment." "Indeed," agrees your master, "though I've had mixed results with tutors. The last one tried to put too many ideas in my children's heads, had to sell him to a friend in Syracuse. The idea that your education, your thoughts, your very identity could be considered dangerous and result in punishment chills you. In this world, even your mind isn't truly your own. By evening, exhaustion has settled into your bones like lead. Every muscle aches from unaccustomed labor, and your mind reels from trying to navigate the complex social rules of this new world. There's so much to learn, so many potential mistakes that could result in pain or worse. As the household prepares for the evening meal, the slaves whisper about a rumor that has just reached the villa. News of Spartacus and the famous slave rebellion is being discussed. Even though this happened over a century ago, the story still holds power, both as inspiration and warning. "They say he led thousands of slaves against Rome itself," murmurs one young man with excitement in his eyes, "and they were all crucified along the Appian Way when they failed," counters an older slave sharply. 6,000 crosses lining the road to Rome. Remember that part of the story, too. The conversation dies quickly as an overseer walks past, but it leaves you pondering the impossibility of your situation. Rebellion seems futile, escape unlikely, and even if you were to somehow gain freedom, you'd be entering a world entirely foreign to your modern understanding. Night falls, and you're finally permitted to return to the slave quarters. Your body feels broken, your spirit not far behind. As you settle onto your thin sleeping mat, an elderly slave woman next to you notices your despair. "The first day is always the hardest," she says gently. "You'll grow stronger or you won't survive. That's the simple truth of our existence." "How do you bear it?" you ask, voice barely a whisper. She's quiet for a long moment before answering. "We find small freedoms where we can. In our thoughts, in moments of kindness between us, in the knowledge that even masters must eventually face death, just as we do. We are human, despite what they believe." Her words offer little concrete comfort, yet somehow they help you find the resolve to face tomorrow. As you drift towards sleep, your mind grapples with the harsh reality you've discovered. In ancient Rome, slavery wasn't an aberration or a crime. It was the foundation upon which everything else was built. And surviving even a single day within this system requires a strength and resilience you're not sure you possess. The villa grows quiet except for the soft sounds of breathing and the occasional distant voice of the night watch. Tomorrow will bring more of the same. Work, hunger, fear, and the constant reminder that your life is not your own. But for now, sleep offers a temporary escape, a brief return to freedom and dreams. As you finally drift off, one thought circles in your tired mind. The people of ancient Rome built wonders that would last millennia, created art and literature of timeless beauty, and established principles of law and governance that still influence our world today. Yet all of it, the grandeur, the culture, the very functioning of daily life, rested upon the bent backs of countless slaves whose names and stories would largely be forgotten by history. You now understand why you wouldn't last a day as a Roman slave. It's not just the physical hardship, though that alone would break most modern people. It's the psychological reality of being property, of having your humanity denied in 1,000 large and small ways, of knowing that for most, there is no escape from this life except through death. And yet tomorrow, you'll rise with the sun and try to survive another day in a world where your life is valued only for the work it can produce. You wake with a start as someone shakes your shoulder roughly. For a blissful moment, you forget where you are, but reality crashes back as you open your eyes to see the cramped slave quarters in the dim pre-dawn light. Your second day as a Roman slave has begun, and your body still aches from yesterday's labors. Up, up, the master has guests arriving today. Much work to do. It's Malia, the older Gallic woman who showed you to the kitchen yesterday. There's urgency in her voice that wasn't there before. Around you, other slaves are already rising, moving with the practiced efficiency of those who've long ago learned that hesitation invites punishment. Some have been enslaved since birth, the Verni, homeborn slaves who've never known freedom. Others, like Malia, were captured in Rome's endless wars of conquest. A few were once citizens who fell into debt slavery or were condemned for crimes. Each face tells a different story of how they arrived at the same destination, servitude in this Roman household. What's happening today, you ask, voice still thick with sleep as you struggle to your feet. Senator Gaius Marius Tullus is visiting with his family, Malia explains, as she hurries you along. Our master hopes to secure a marriage arrangement between his daughter and the senator's son. Everything must be perfect. You follow the stream of slaves, moving through the pre-dawn darkness toward different parts of the villa. Some head to the kitchens, others to prepare baths, clean the atrium, or tend the gardens. The household functions through their coordinated efforts, like a human machine, with each slave a replaceable part. Today, you're assigned to help prepare the triclinium, the formal dining room where the master will entertain his important guests. Malia leads you there, explaining your duties in rapid, hushed tones. You'll help arrange the couches, polish the silver, and then assist during the meal service. Stand against the wall when not needed. Never speak unless spoken to directly. Don't look the guests in the eye. Move quickly but silently, and most importantly, be invisible. Good service means they barely notice you exist. The dining room is already bustling with activity. Slaves are arranging 3 wide couches in a U shape around a central table. Others are polishing bronze lamps or arranging fresh flowers. Everyone moves with purpose, directed by Stephanos, the Greek steward who manages the household slaves. Stephanos is a peculiar figure in the slave hierarchy. Though technically a slave himself, he wields considerable authority as the master's representative. He's educated, well-spoken, and enjoys privileges other slaves can only dream of. Better food, private quarters, fine clothing, and even his own small slave to assist him. You quickly learn that earning his favor can make your life significantly easier. You, new one, he snaps, noticing you standing uncertainly in the doorway. Polish these. He thrusts a basket of silver cups into your hands and points to a corner where cleaning materials wait. The cups are exquisitely crafted, worth more individually than you would be at the slave market. This thought sends a chill through you. In this world, your value as a human being is quantifiable, negotiable, and generally less than fine housewares. As you work, other slaves share whispered advice between tasks. The senator's body slave is known for reporting other slaves' mistakes to improve his own standing, warns a young man arranging cushions. Watch yourself around him. If wine spills, clean it instantly. The master had Titus flogged for allowing a stain on the table at the last dinner. Adds a woman placing oil lamps. You listen intently, understanding that such knowledge might save you from punishment. The complex web of relationships, expectations, and hidden dangers makes navigating this world exhausting before the real work even begins. By mid-morning, the triclinium gleams with opulence. Silver and gold vessels catch the light streaming through high windows. Fresh-cut flowers perfume the air. Mosaic floors depicting hunting scenes have been swept and washed until they shine. The dining couches are draped with the finest embroidered fabrics, imported at great expense from the eastern provinces. As preparations continue, you're sent to the kitchens to help carry supplies. There, the atmosphere is chaotic. Cooks shouting orders, smoke filling the air, slaves rushing in all directions. The meal being prepared would cost a fortune in your time. Exotic ingredients from across the empire, meats and seafood in abundance, imported wines and fruits that have traveled weeks to reach this table. Careful with those oysters. They came all the way from Britannia, shouts the head cook as a young slave nearly drops a tray. The scale of resources devoted to a single meal for perhaps a dozen guests is staggering. Meanwhile, the slaves who make it all possible subsist on simple porridge, coarse bread, occasional vegetables, and watered wine. Meat is a rarity, reserved for festival days when the master feels generous. As you help in the kitchen, a commotion draws your attention to the service entrance. 2 burly men drag in a young male slave, perhaps 16 years old. His back is bloody from a recent whipping, his face streaked with tears and dirt. Caught him trying to run away, explains one of the men, the villa's security enforcer. Master says make an example of him before selling him to the mines. Your blood runs cold as you witness what happens next. The boy is thrust into a kneeling position before all the assembled kitchen slaves. Stephanos arrives, his face a mask of stern disapproval. "This is what happens to runners," he announces. Felix here thought he could escape his lawful master. Now he'll wear the Fugitivus brand on his forehead for life, before serving out his days in the silver mines of Hispania. A brazier is brought forward, a small iron rod heating in its coals. The boy struggles but is held firmly by the two men. When the brand touches his forehead, his scream pierces through the kitchen. The smell of burning flesh makes your stomach turn. When they release him, a distinct F for Fugitivus is seared permanently into his skin, marking him forever as a runaway slave. "Let this be a lesson," Stephanos tells the silent, horrified kitchen staff. "Your lives here are better than most slaves could hope for. Ungrateful behavior brings only suffering." The branded boy is dragged away, destined for a life that's essentially a death sentence. Few slaves survive more than a few years in the mines, working in darkness, chained at the ankles, breathing toxic dust, and receiving just enough food to keep working until their bodies fail. This brutal reminder of your status casts a pall over the kitchen. Work resumes silently, everyone avoiding eye contact. You feel a new weight of fear settling over you. The consequences of resistance are too terrible to contemplate. By midday, the senator's party arrives. From your position helping in the atrium, you catch glimpses of the elaborate greeting ritual. Your master's family emerges in their finest clothes to welcome the distinguished guests. Slaves stand at attention along the walls, part of the display of household wealth and proper management. "Gaius Marius Tullus, what an honor to welcome you to our humble home," your master exclaims, though there's nothing humble about the lavish villa with its marble columns and elaborate frescoes. The senator, a stern-looking man in a toga with a broad purple stripe indicating his rank, nods graciously. Behind him stands his family and an entourage of personal slaves carrying various items, changes of clothing, writing materials, even folding chairs, in case the host's furnishings prove unsatisfactory. You notice differences among the senator's slaves that reflect the Roman social hierarchy. His secretary is well-dressed, clean, and stands with dignity, an educated Greek, most likely, valued for his literacy and administrative skills. His body servant wears finer clothes than most free commoners could afford, another display of the senator's wealth. But behind them trudge ordinary household slaves bearing burdens, and at the rear, chained at the ankles, two huge men with scars and branded foreheads, gladiator slaves who serve as the senator's bodyguards. As the social pleasantries continue, you're dispatched back to the kitchen to help with meal preparations. The hours pass in a blur of activity. Finally, as the afternoon lengthens into evening, the grand dinner begins. You're assigned to stand along the wall, ready to remove empty plates and refill wine cups when signaled. The guests recline on their left sides on the dining couches, leaving their right hands free to take food from the shared platters. Course after course arrives: eggs and seafood appetizers, roasted meats, exotic birds, vegetable dishes prepared with expensive spices, all accompanied by the finest wines served in the silver cups you polished earlier. You and the other slaves move silently around the periphery of the room, ever watchful for empty cups or plates, trained to anticipate needs before they're expressed. The diners barely acknowledge your existence as you take their plates or pour their wine. You are furniture to them, useful but unworthy of notice. Their conversation flows freely, covering politics, business, and gossip. They speak as if the slaves aren't present, discussing sensitive matters without concern. This invisibility is both degrading and educational. You learn much about Roman society from what they say when they think no one important is listening. The grain shipments from Egypt are delayed again, complains the senator between bites of roasted peacock. The urban plebs grow restless when their bread dole is late. I fear riots if the situation isn't resolved. Perhaps they should work instead of expecting free grain, remarks another guest, a wealthy merchant. Careful, Lucius, laughs your master. Next you'll suggest they should work like slaves. The table erupts in laughter at the absurdity. Free citizens laboring like slaves? Unthinkable. The very foundation of Roman society depends on the distinction between the free and the enslaved. Even the poorest citizen possesses something invaluable, libertas, freedom under the law, that sets them eternally apart from even the most privileged slave. As the meal progresses and wine flows freely, the conversation turns to the current slave markets. Prices are outrageous these days, complains one guest. I need a new secretary, but they're asking 100,000 sesterces for a well-educated Greek. I remember when you could get one for half that. War captives are cheaper, offers another. The legions just put down that revolt in Judea. The markets should be flooded soon. Yes, but they're rebellious, those Jews. Too much trouble. Give me a docile Gaul or German any day. They discuss human lives as casually as they might talk about purchasing horses or furniture. Each nationality of slave has a stereotype attached. Greeks are intelligent but duplicitous. Syrians make good entertainers. Gauls are strong but slow-witted. Britons are wild and difficult to train. You almost drop a wine jug when your master gestures toward you. My newest purchase seems literate. Cost me 30,000 sesterces. We'll see if the investment was worthwhile. The senator examines you with the clinical eye of a man assessing livestock. Seems sturdy enough. Where did the dealer say this one came from? Your master shrugs, claims to be from beyond the empire's borders, but they all say that to increase their exotic value. Probably just another debt slave from Italia, trying to seem more interesting. They laugh again, and the conversation moves on, but the casual dehumanization, being discussed as an object while standing right there, cuts deeper than any physical hardship you've endured so far. The evening stretches on for hours. Entertainment arrives. Musicians, dancers, and even a learned slave who recites Homer from memory. Finally, as the night grows late, the guests retire to prepared sleeping chambers. You and the other dining slaves begin the arduous task of cleaning up. You did well enough, says Malia as you help her gather silver cups. Kept your eyes down, didn't spill anything. That's the best you can hope for on your first serving duty. How do you stand it? You whisper, careful not to let others hear. Being treated like you're not even human? She gives you a sharp look. We are human, to each other. That's how we survive. They can own our bodies, but not what's inside. She taps her forehead. Remember that, or this life will crush your spirit before it breaks your body. It's well past midnight when you finally return to the slave quarters. Your feet throb from hours of standing, your arms ache from carrying heavy trays, and your mind reels from everything you've witnessed. As you settle onto your sleeping mat, the elderly slave woman who spoke to you last night notices your troubled expression. Rough day? She asks softly. They branded a boy for trying to escape, you reply, and then talked about selling people while I stood right there, like I was a chair or a table. She nods sadly. The worst pain of slavery isn't the work or even the punishment. It's being made invisible as a person. But remember, we see each other, even when they refuse to see us. Is there ever any hope of freedom, you ask? For some, she admits. Your master sometimes frees slaves in his will or allows them to buy their freedom after many years of service. But even freedom has its limits for us. She explains that freed slaves, liberty, still owe obligations to their former masters. They aren't equal to freeborn citizens. They can't hold political office. Their children are free, but still carry the stigma of slave ancestry. True equality is generally impossible, though there are rare exceptions. Former slaves who amass wealth or whose children rise in status over generations. The emperor's freedmen are some of the most powerful men in the empire, she tells you. They manage his correspondence, his finances, his household. Some control more wealth than senators, but they're exceptional cases. As you drift towards sleep, exhaustion finally overcoming the day's distress, you reflect on how fundamentally slavery shaped every aspect of Roman society. It wasn't a peripheral institution, but the central one, the foundation upon which Rome's grandeur was built. Without slaves, there would be no magnificent public buildings, no elaborate lifestyle for the elite, no leisure time for the arts, philosophy, and politics that made Roman civilization what it was. Sleep comes fitfully, interrupted by dreams of the branded boy and the casual cruelty you witnessed. You wake frequently, disoriented and afraid, before falling back into uncomfortable slumber. In your dreams, you see the true face of Roman slavery, not just the physical hardship, which is considerable, but the psychological trauma of being property, the constant fear, the severed family bonds, the denial of basic human dignity, and you understand why a modern person, accustomed to freedom and rights, would struggle to survive even a single day in this brutal system. Morning arrives too soon. As the first light filters through the high window, you hear the familiar voice of the overseer. Up, everyone up. The master inspects the villa today. Another day of servitude begins. Your body, still unaccustomed to the physical demands, protests every movement, but you rise anyway, knowing the alternative is worse. In just one day, you've begun the mental and emotional adaptation that would be necessary for survival, lowering expectations, focusing on small mercies, finding solidarity with fellow slaves, becoming invisible when necessary. But you've also realized that complete adaptation might mean losing something essential, the core belief in your own humanity that makes freedom worth fighting for. The most heartbreaking aspect of Roman slavery was perhaps not that it broke people physically, but that it could, over time, convince them of their own inferiority, make them internalize their status as property rather than persons. As you follow the other slaves out to begin the day's labor, you carry this new understanding with you, that the most insidious chains in ancient Rome were not the iron ones that bound wrists and ankles, but the invisible ones that society forged around minds and spirits, chains that could outlast even formal manumission. And you wonder, as you face another day in ancient Rome's vast machine of human bondage, how long your modern sense of self could withstand this constant assault, or whether it's already beginning to crack under the pressure of survival in a world where your humanity is not a birthright, but a privilege granted to others and denied to you. Days blend into one another as you settle into the grinding rhythm of slave life in the Roman villa. Each morning begins before dawn and ends long after sunset. The work is constant, the rest insufficient, and the food barely adequate to maintain your strength. Yet compared to many slaves across the vast Roman Empire, you've been fortunate so far. Today marks your 7th day in this ancient world, a week that has felt like a lifetime. Your body has begun to adapt to the physical demands, though your hands remain blistered and your muscles perpetually sore. It's your mind that struggles most, attempting to reconcile your modern understanding of human rights and dignity with the everyday reality of being property. You, come with me. Stephanos, the household steward, appears suddenly as you're cleaning the atrium floor. His expression gives nothing away as he beckons you to follow. Fear immediately coils in your stomach. Being singled out rarely means anything good for a slave. Has someone reported a mistake? Did you speak too freely with another slave? Or perhaps the master simply decided your purchase was a poor investment and plans to sell you to recover his costs. You follow Stephanos through the villa's corridors, past other slaves who glance at you with sympathy, but quickly return to their tasks. He leads you to a small room near the master's study, where scrolls line the walls and a writing desk sits by the window. The master has reviewed your skills, Stephanos says, his voice crisp and professional. He believes you might be useful for record-keeping. You claimed literacy. Now we'll test it. Relief floods through you. This could be an improvement in your situation. Indoor work, less physically demanding, potentially higher status in the slave hierarchy. You'll assist Marcus, Stephanos continues, indicating a middle-aged man arranging wax tablets at the desk. He manages the master's household accounts and correspondence. If you prove competent, this will be your new assignment. Marcus looks up, assessing you with intelligent eyes. Unlike many slaves, he's well-dressed in a clean tunic, and his hands are unmarked by hard labor. He's clearly a valued slave with specialized skills, the kind who might eventually earn freedom through faithful service. Can you read Latin? Marcus asks after Stephanos leaves. And what about Greek? Many household accounts are kept in Greek. You hesitate, unsure how to answer. In your time, you understood modern languages that evolved from Latin, but ancient Latin itself? And classical Greek? This could expose you immediately. I can read some Latin, you reply cautiously. Less Greek. I'm willing to learn more. Marcus seems unsurprised. Most who claim literacy exaggerate their abilities. Here, copy this onto a fresh tablet. He hands you a stylus and a wax tablet with Latin text, a list of household supplies with quantities. Your hands tremble slightly as you take the implements. This moment could determine your fate in this world. The letters look familiar enough. Latin uses the same alphabet you know, but the handwriting style is different, more formal. You begin copying carefully, grateful that numbers at least remain recognizable across the centuries. Marcus watches your work with mild interest. Your hand is untrained, but you do seem to understand the text. Where did you learn to read? Were you born into household service? This opens a dangerous line of questioning. You need a plausible backstory that explains your unusual knowledge and skills without revealing the impossible truth. I was educated as a child, you respond vaguely. Before I was enslaved. Ah, a free person once. Marcus nods with understanding. There are many like you these days. The fortunes of men rise and fall quickly under the current emperor. His assumption provides the perfect cover. He believes you're a former citizen who fell into slavery through debt or political misfortune, a common enough occurrence in Roman society that it doesn't require further explanation. For the next several hours, Marcus tests your abilities and begins teaching you the household accounting system. You learn that the master owns not just this villa, but several properties throughout Italia and the provinces. He has investments in shipping ventures, lending operations, and various urban properties in Rome itself. His wealth depends on the labor of hundreds of slaves across these different enterprises. You'll need to learn how we track expenses and income, Marcus explains. The master expects detailed accounts. Making errors costs more than just punishment. It damages trust, which is the only real currency a slave possesses. As you work, Marcus shares his own story in bits and pieces. He was born a slave in the household, the son of the previous accountant and a kitchen slave. His intelligence was recognized early, and he was trained specifically for this role. He's never known freedom, yet he's carved out a life of relative comfort and respect within the strict confines of his status. The master has promised me manumission when I turn 50, he tells you, a rare smile softening his serious features. 5 more years. I have been saving from my peculium to establish a small business afterward. The peculium he mentions is the unofficial allowance some slaves are permitted to accumulate, not legally their property, as slaves could own nothing, but funds the master allows them to manage and potentially use to purchase their freedom. What kind of business, you ask, genuinely curious about the future prospects of a freed slave? A small scribal service, perhaps, or accounting for merchants. He shrugs. Options are limited for freedmen, but still better than this, though I'll remain the master's client, of course. This reminder of the patron-client relationship that bound freed slaves to their former masters illustrates another layer of Roman society's intricately stratified system. Even freedom has gradations and limitations in this world. The day passes more comfortably than any since your arrival. By evening, Marcus seems satisfied with your potential, if not yet your skills. You'll return tomorrow, he tells you. I'll speak with Stephanos about making this your permanent assignment. As you leave the accounting room, your spirits lifted by this turn of events, you encounter a commotion in the peristyle garden. A group of new slaves is being led into the villa, recent purchases being assigned to various duties. They look exhausted and disoriented, their expressions mirroring what yours must have been a week ago. Among them, one face stands out, a woman perhaps in her 30s, holding a small child close to her side. The child, a boy no more than 5 years old, clings to her, wide-eyed with fear. Something about their closeness, the protective way she holds him, makes you pause. Malia appears beside you, following your gaze. Mother and child, she explains quietly. Rare for them to be sold together. The master must have wanted her skills badly enough to take the child as part of the purchase. What happens to slave children, you ask, watching as the group is divided and led to different parts of the household. If they're born here, they belong to the master, like any other slave property. Malia explains matter-of-factly. Some are trained for household service from young ages. Pretty ones might be raised for other purposes. Her expression darkens. Boys with promise might be educated as scribes or craftsmen. The rest are usually sold once they're old enough to work independently, around 8 or 9 years. The casual way she describes the separation of families, the commodification of children, sends a chill through you. In your time, such practices would be considered among the gravest human rights violations. Here, they're simply the norm, unremarkable enough that even slaves discuss them without particular outrage. That evening in the slave quarters, you encounter the mother and child again. They've been assigned sleeping space near yours, the small boy curled against his mother on their shared mat, finally asleep after what must have been a terrifying day. I'm Livia, the woman whispers, careful not to wake her son. This is Marcus. Not the same Marcus as the accountant. It was a common name in ancient Rome, you recall. How long have you been enslaved? You ask gently. Her eyes reflect deep weariness. 3 years. Our village in Gaul was conquered by the legions. My husband was killed fighting. Little Marcus and I were taken with other captives. We've had 2 masters before this one. You've managed to stay together, you observe, nodding toward her sleeping child. By the goddess's mercy, she replies. I've seen so many mothers separated from their children at the auction block. I've promised Marcus I'll never leave him, but she leaves the thought unfinished. You both know she has no power to keep such promises in a world where slaves have no rights to family bonds. Her situation crystallizes another harsh aspect of Roman slavery that your modern mind struggles to process: the complete disregard for family units. Husbands and wives, parents and children, siblings, all could be separated at the whim of a master or the stroke of an auctioneer's hammer. The emotional trauma of such separations was simply not a consideration in a system that viewed slaves as tools rather than people with human attachments. Sleep comes uneasily that night, your mind filled with images of families torn apart, children growing up never knowing their parents, mothers and fathers forced to wonder forever what became of their sons and daughters. The psychological cruelty of this aspect of slavery seems, in some ways, even more unbearable than the physical hardships. The next morning brings an unexpected announcement. The master is traveling to one of his country estates and requires an entourage of household slaves to accompany him. To your surprise, your name is among those listed. Apparently, your new role assisting Marcus includes traveling to help with property accounts. Pack nothing, you'll be provided what you need. Stephanos instructs the selected slaves. We leave at dawn tomorrow. The news spreads excitement and anxiety through the slave quarters. Travel means a break from routine, but also new risks and unknowns. For you, it offers an opportunity to see more of Roman Italy and perhaps gain insights into the broader realities of slavery beyond this single household. That evening, as preparations for the journey continue, the elderly slave woman who's offered you wisdom since your arrival seeks you out. You're going to the country estate, she states. It's not a question. Yes, to continue my training with Marcus, the accountant. She nods slowly. Listen carefully. The rural estate is different from here. The slaves there live harder lives. Many are chained while they work. The overseers use the whip freely. What you'll see may shock you. Why tell me this, you ask? Because you still have city eyes, she replies cryptically. You see cruelty here and think it's the worst there is. It isn't. Most slaves live far worse lives than household servants in a wealthy villa. Remember that when you're there, and remember to guard your reactions. Showing too much sympathy for the field slaves will only bring suspicion on you. Her warning stays with you through the night and into the next morning as your journey begins. The master travels in a comfortable covered carriage, while his entourage of slaves, about 20 in total, walks alongside and behind, carrying necessary items for the journey. The only slaves permitted to ride are the master's personal body servant and a musician he's particularly fond of. The journey takes the full day, following the famous Roman roads that stretch across the peninsula like stone arteries. These roads, built largely by slave labor, represent both the engineering genius of Rome and its exploitation of unfree workers. Thousands died constructing these smooth highways that allowed Roman armies, commerce, and culture to spread throughout the known world. By late afternoon, you catch your first glimpse of the country estate, a sprawling agricultural operation centered around a smaller but still impressive villa. Fields stretch in every direction, with small figures toiling under the hot sun. As you draw closer, the details become clearer and more disturbing. Unlike the household slaves, these agricultural workers wear ragged tunics or loincloths. Many have their ankles chained, limiting their movement while still allowing them to work. Overseers on horseback patrol the fields, whips visible in their hands. The scene resembles nothing so much as the plantation slavery of a much later era, a connection historians in your time had often noted. The master's carriage proceeds directly to the villa, where the household staff emerges to greet him. These house slaves are better dressed and fed than the field workers, but still visibly less well off than their counterparts in the city villa. As you help unload the master's belongings, a harsh cry echoes from beyond the villa walls. The household slaves ignore it with practiced indifference, but you can't help glancing toward the sound. An older male slave notices your reaction. Punishment in the ergastulum, he explains quietly, referring to the farm prison where disobedient slaves are confined and disciplined. Someone failed to meet their work quota. That night, after being assigned sleeping quarters in the slave section of the villa, you learn more about the operation of the estate from conversations among the slaves. This property primarily produces olive oil and wine, both labor-intensive crops that require large numbers of workers. Nearly 300 slaves work here year-round, with more hired during harvest seasons. Most of them never leave the fields, explains a cook named Demetrius. They sleep in barracks near where they work. Only skilled slaves and household servants live in the villa proper. What about their families, you ask, remembering Livia and her son. Demetrius laughs bitterly. Families? Field slaves aren't allowed to form families. The men and women are kept separate except during controlled breeding periods when the master decides more slave children would be economically beneficial. The systematic dehumanization reaches new depths here. Urban household slaves, for all their hardships, at least maintain some semblance of normal human relationships. Here, even that small dignity is denied to field slaves, their reproduction controlled like livestock. How do they survive such conditions? You whisper. They don't, for long, replies Demetrius. Few last more than 10 years in the fields. That's why the master keeps buying new ones, cheaper than treating the ones he has better, he says. The brutal economic calculus shocks you. In this system, it makes financial sense to work slaves to death and replace them rather than invest in their well-being. The average field slave might cost the equivalent of 2 or 3 years of their labor. After that, their continued work was pure profit until they became too weak to continue, at which point they would be sold off cheaply or abandoned. The next morning, your work with Marcus begins in earnest. The country estate keeps separate financial records from the urban villa, and part of your job is to help reconcile these accounts during the master's visit. The work provides a window into the economics of Roman slavery that textbooks in your time could only approximate. Each slave is listed as an asset with a specific value. Their output is calculated against their maintenance costs, food, minimal clothing, shelter. Medical care is provided only for valuable slaves whose skills would be costly to replace. The ledgers include matter-of-fact notations about slaves who died, depreciation of aging slaves' values, and projections for child slaves who would reach full working age in coming years. During a break in the afternoon, you witness the arrival of a slave trader leading a small group of newly purchased workers, captives from a recent military campaign in Britannia, based on their appearance. They look shell-shocked, many bearing wounds from battle or the journey. Among them are several who clearly came from elite backgrounds in their homeland. Their bearing, and even in captivity, suggests they were once nobles or warriors. They'll break eventually, comments a stable slave watching beside you. They all do. The proud ones just take longer and suffer more in the process. That evening, unable to sleep despite your exhaustion, you slip out of the slave quarters and walk quietly through the villa gardens. The night is clear, stars shining over the Italian countryside, just as they did 2,000 years later in your time. The continuity of the natural world stands in stark contrast to the radical differences in human society. Your solitary reflection is interrupted by the sound of soft singing coming from the direction of the field slave barracks. Following the sound, You discover a small group of slaves gathered in the shadows beyond the overseer's view. Their voices blend in a low, mournful melody, a song in a language you don't recognize, possibly from North Africa or the eastern provinces. You remain hidden, not wanting to intrude on what is clearly a private ritual of solidarity and remembrance. The song speaks of homeland, of family, of gods now distant but not forgotten. It's a moment of humanity reclaimed in a system designed to strip it away. A quiet act of resistance through cultural memory. As you turn to leave, you nearly collide with an older field slave who has been watching both you and the singers from another vantage point. He regards you with caution at first, then recognition dawns in his eyes. "You're from the city villa," he says. "The new one working with the accountant." You nod, uncertain whether he represents a threat to the singers or to you. "I was household staff once, years ago," he continues, his voice rough from years of outdoor work, "before I grew too old for the master's taste and was sent to the fields. I'm Titus." "Why are you telling me this?" you ask. "Because you watched them with understanding, not disgust or fear," he replies, nodding toward the singers who continue their quiet ritual. "Most house slaves look at us like we're animals. You looked at them like they're people." His observation is uncomfortably accurate. There's a hierarchical snobbery even among slaves. Household servants often view field workers as inferior, embracing the very prejudices that the free population directs toward all slaves. "How long have you been in the fields?" you ask. 8 years. "I'll not last much longer." He says this without self-pity, merely stating facts. Few do. The work breaks your body. The chains break your spirit. But we remember who we were before. He gestures toward the singers. That's why they sing, to remember. The overseers allow it because it prevents worse forms of rebellion. His mention of rebellion sends a chill through you. Has there been trouble here? Titus studies you carefully before answering. There was an incident last harvest. Some thought to follow Spartacus's example. They failed, as all such attempts must. The ringleaders were crucified. The rest were sold to the mines, which is worse than crucifixion, just slower. The conversation is dangerous for both of you. Discussing slave rebellions, even historical ones, could be interpreted as seditious. Yet Titus seems determined to share his knowledge. "Why risk telling me this?" you press. "Because someone should remember," he replies simply. "When I die in these fields, as I surely will, someone should know I was once a person with thoughts and memories. Maybe you'll remember, city slave. Maybe you'll tell someone else someday." His words strike at the heart of slavery's deepest cruelty, the erasure of individual human stories, the reduction of complex lives to entries in an account book. In your time, historians struggled to reconstruct the experiences of the enslaved, precisely because their voices were systematically silenced, their perspectives rarely recorded. "I'll remember, you promise, though you know it's unlikely you'll ever be able to share his story with anyone in your own time." You part ways before your absence from the slave quarters is noticed. As you slip back into your sleeping spot, you find yourself haunted not just by Titus's words, but by the stark divide you've witnessed between house slaves and field slaves, a division that helps maintain the entire system by preventing unified resistance. The Roman slave system, you're realizing, was not maintained merely through physical force, though that was ever present. It was reinforced through complex social stratification, through granting small privileges to some slaves that gave them a stake in preserving the system, through destroying family bonds that might foster solidarity, and through systematic erasure of cultural identities. In the darkness, you consider your week and a half in this ancient world. Your modern sensibilities have already begun to adapt. You find yourself grateful for the relative comfort of household slavery compared to the fields, thinking in terms of survival rather than freedom. This mental adjustment, this lowering of expectations, represents perhaps the most insidious aspect of the system, and you wonder how long before you might fully internalize the logic of slavery. How many months or years would it take before you stopped seeing the injustice altogether? Before you, like some of the household slaves, began to look down on field slaves as deserving of their worse condition. Before your conception of freedom shrank to the narrow hope of individual manumission rather than systemic change. These questions have no easy answers, but they illuminate why modern people, raised with concepts of universal human rights and individual dignity, would find it almost impossible to survive in the Roman slave system, not just physically, but psychologically. The cost of survival might be the very values and sense of self that make survival meaningful. As sleep finally claims you, your dreams are filled with the haunting melody of the field slave's song, a reminder that despite everything, resistance persisted, if only in the simple insistence on remembering one's humanity in a world determined to deny it. 3 days at the country estate stretch into a week as the master extends his stay to oversee the olive harvest. Each day brings new insights into the vast machinery of Roman slavery that powers the empire's economy. You continue working with Marcus, becoming more adept at the accounting systems that track every aspect of the estate's operation, from crop yields to slave productivity. The ledgers tell a cold story of human exploitation translated into profit. Field slaves who fall ill are recorded as temporary losses in productivity. Those who die are written off as depleted assets. New births among slave women are noted as property acquisitions. The entire system is calibrated to extract maximum value from human bodies with minimal investment in their well-being. On your 8th day at the rural estate, you're summoned unexpectedly to the master's study. Your heart pounds as you follow Stephanos through the villa's corridors. Direct interaction with the master is rare for most slaves and often signals either exceptional favor or imminent punishment. The study is a richly appointed room with frescoed walls depicting mythological scenes. Scrolls fill wooden shelves, and a large desk dominates the center, covered with wax tablets and papyri. The master sits behind it, deep in conversation with Marcus and a weather-beaten man you haven't met, the estate's head overseer, judging by his rough clothing and the whip coiled at his belt. "Ah, the new one," your master says, noticing your arrival. Marcus speaks well of your progress with the accounts. You keep your eyes lowered respectfully, as you've learned is expected. "Thank you, Domine. I have a task requiring discretion," he continues. "Tomorrow you'll accompany Proculus here to the port at Ostia. A shipment arrives that needs proper accounting before being transported here. The overseer, Proculus, regards you with undisguised suspicion. Is this one trustworthy? The cargo is valuable." "Marcus vouches for him," the master replies casually. "And unlike some, this one has nowhere to run. No connections, no knowledge of the land." He laughs. "Besides, Proculus, you'll have your men. If there's trouble, handle it, as you always do." The implied threat needs no elaboration. You've seen enough of how escaped slaves are treated to understand the consequences of attempted flight. You leave at dawn, Stephanos tells you after the meeting concludes. Travel light. The journey to Ostia takes most of a day. That evening, as slaves gather in their quarters, after the day's work, excitement buzzes around you. Travel beyond the estate is a rare privilege and a glimpse of the wider world many household slaves never experience. Ostia is magnificent, enthuses a young kitchen slave who once accompanied the master's wife there. Ships from every corner of the empire fill the harbor. You'll see people from lands you've never imagined. "Watch yourself with Proculus," warns another in a lower voice. "He was a gladiator before the master bought and freed him. Now he enforces the master's will with the same brutality he showed in the arena." The night passes with fitful sleep, your mind filled with both anticipation and anxiety about the journey ahead. Before dawn, you join Proculus and 4 burly men at the estate's gates. Unlike you, they're armed with short swords and dressed for the road. "Keep up and stay silent," Proculus instructs curtly. "We've no time to coddle house slaves unused to travel." The journey proves grueling. Unlike the master's leisurely procession to the estate, this is a forced march designed for speed rather than comfort. Your party follows the same Roman roads, but at a pace that leaves your feet blistered and legs aching by midday. The only breaks are brief stops to drink from streams or roadside fountains. The countryside unfolds around you, rolling hills covered with olive groves, vineyards, and wheat fields. Occasionally, you pass other villas and estates, each representing another nucleus of slave power production. Farm slaves toil in distant fields, their circumstances invisible from the road, but all too easy for you to imagine after your time at the master's estate. By late afternoon, the character of the landscape changes. Small settlements appear more frequently along the road. Traffic increases. Merchants with carts of goods, travelers on horseback, slaves carrying messages between estates. You begin to encounter people of diverse appearance, dark-skinned merchants from North Africa, fair-haired traders from Gaul, Greek sailors, and travelers from the eastern provinces in distinctive clothing. "The port is near," Proculus announces as the road crests a hill. Below, sprawling toward the sea, lies Ostia, Rome's gateway to the Mediterranean and one of the busiest ports in the ancient world. The city overwhelms your senses after weeks confined to rural settings. Streets bustle with activity as traders, sailors, slaves, and citizens from across the empire conduct the business that keeps Rome fed and supplied. The buildings rise several stories high, apartment blocks called insulae housing the urban poor. Temples, bathhouses, and commercial structures line the main thoroughfares. And everywhere, endless streams of human traffic flow through the streets. Proculus leads your group confidently through the maze of streets toward the harbor. Here, the true scale of Roman commerce becomes apparent. Massive ships from Egypt, Spain, North Africa, and the East crowd the docks. Cranes operated by teams of slaves unload enormous amphorae containing wine, olive oil, and garum, fish sauce. Grain ships disgorge their critical cargo, destined for Rome's hungry masses, and moving through it all are hundreds, perhaps thousands of slaves. They load and unload ships, carry merchandise to warehouses, serve as messengers between merchants, and perform countless other tasks that keep the commercial heart of the empire beating. "Our shipment arrived on the morning tide," Proculus informs you, pointing to a medium-sized vessel bearing Eastern markings. "We'll inspect the cargo, verify the manifest, and arrange transport to the estate." As you approach the ship, a well-dressed man, clearly the merchant in charge, greets Proculus with the familiarity of regular business partners. They converse briefly before turning their attention to the cargo being unloaded. The ship's hold contains dozens of large clay jars, sealed with wax and marked with symbols you don't recognize. But it's the second part of the cargo that causes your breath to catch. People. About 20 men and women of various ages are led from below decks, chained together at the wrists and ankles. Mostly Syrians, the merchant explains to Proculus. Strong workers, already broken to discipline. A few Greeks among them, educated, good for household service, all as requested. You watch, stomach churning, as the human cargo is inspected with the same clinical detachment as the clay jars. Proculus and his men check teeth, muscles, and eyes, looking for signs of disease or weakness. The merchant provides background on each, their origins, skills, and how they came to be enslaved. Some were war captives, others condemned criminals, and several were simply unfortunate souls kidnapped by pirates or slave hunters. Your job, Proculus tells you, thrusting a wax tablet into your hands, is to record each one. Name if they have one worth keeping, age, origin, skills, and the price paid. The master needs proper documentation for his investment. With trembling hands, you begin the grim accounting. Each person in line becomes a ledger entry, their humanity reduced to commercial metrics. A young Syrian woman clutches a small child, perhaps 3 years old, to her chest. The merchant assures Proculus that the child is included in the mother's price, a package deal, since the child is too young for separate sale. She'll work harder if she keeps her brat, the merchant explains, and in a few years the child becomes another worker, good value for your master. By sunset, the transaction is complete. The new slaves are secured in a holding pen by the docks, where they'll spend the night before beginning the journey to the estate tomorrow. You've recorded each one in the master's accounts, officially transforming them from people into property with the stroke of a stylus. Proculus leads you and his men to a nearby inn where arrangements have been made for your overnight stay. Unlike the newly purchased slaves shivering in the dockside pen, you'll sleep on pallets in a back room of the establishment, a reminder of your marginally higher position in the slave hierarchy. We eat first, Proculus announces. The innkeeper will serve us in the main room. The inn's common room buzzes with the energy of a busy port. Sailors, merchants, and travelers from across the empire crowd the space, creating a cacophony of different languages and accents. The smell of wine, sweat, and unfamiliar spices hangs heavy in the air. As you eat a surprisingly substantial meal, Proculus clearly has instructions to maintain his men's strength for the return journey. You observe the diverse clientele. Not all are free citizens. Many are clearly slaves serving various functions, body servants attending their traveling masters, messengers pausing for refreshment before continuing their journeys, and skilled slaves conducting business on behalf of distant owners. At a nearby table, a group of rough-looking men drink heavily and boast loudly about their recent ventures. It takes you a moment to recognize their profession from fragments of conversation. Slave catchers, specialists in tracking down and returning escaped slaves to their masters for a bounty. Got a runner last week, one brags, displaying a distinctive brand on his forearm, a tool of his trade for identifying fellow slave hunters. Thought he'd make it to the northern provinces. Caught him near Aquileia. Still alive? Asks a companion. Had to be. No bounty for corpses. The man laughs harshly. Not that he'll thank me for it. Master had the hamstrings cut when I brought him back. He won't run again. The casual cruelty of the punishment, deliberately crippling a human being to prevent future escape attempts, sends a wave of nausea through you, yet no one in the tavern reacts to the story with anything but mild interest or approval. In this world, an escaped slave has committed the gravest offense possible, theft of himself, his master's property. At another table, a more refined conversation unfolds between merchants discussing their business prospects. One mentions a recent purchase of slaves for mining operations in Hispania. Quality doesn't matter for the mines, he explains to his colleagues. They don't last long enough to justify premium prices. I buy the cheapest stock available, criminals, the old, the sickly. They'll give me a few months of work before they expire, and by then, they've returned their purchase price tenfold. The mines represented slavery at its most brutal extreme, a literal death sentence where humans were worked until they died, with no pretense of sustainable treatment. Your research in the modern world had told you about these conditions, but hearing them discussed as a sound business strategy by an actual participant in the system brings a new level of horrific reality. As the evening progresses, the inn's atmosphere grows rowdier. A wealthy merchant enters with an entourage that includes two strikingly beautiful young slaves, a boy and a girl, perhaps 16 or 17, dressed in fine clothing and adorned with jewelry. Unlike most slaves, they carry themselves with practiced grace and confident smiles. Delicia, mutters one of Proculus's men, noticing your gaze. Pleasure slaves, worth more than the rest of us combined. These specialized slaves, trained from childhood for the sexual gratification of their masters, occupy a strange position in the hierarchy, materially privileged yet exploited in the most intimate way possible. Their training included not just sexual techniques, but culture, music, poetry, and conversation to make them pleasing companions beyond the bedchamber. The girl will likely be freed when she ages past her master's preference, continues your informant. The boy, too, if he's fortunate, given property, perhaps, or a small business. That's how it works for the beautiful ones. Temporary slavery with a golden retirement if they play their part well enough. This aspect of Roman slavery, the sexual exploitation normalized within the system, represents yet another facet your modern mind struggles to reconcile. These young people's bodies are not their own, their consent irrelevant, yet they've adapted to their circumstance with a performance of willingness that might, eventually, earn them freedom and security. Enough gawking, Proculus interrupts. We rise before dawn, get to your pallet. The night brings troubled sleep on a hard pallet in a room shared with Proculus's men. Their snores and the distant sounds of the port filter through your consciousness as you drift between sleep and wakefulness, your mind processing all you've witnessed today. Morning arrives with the first hints of light. After a quick meal, your party returns to the docks where the newly purchased slaves have spent the night in the holding pen. They look even more miserable than yesterday, tired, hungry, and fearful of what awaits them. Chain them for travel, Proculus orders his men. We need to reach the first milestone by midday. The journey back to the estate becomes a grim procession. Your party now includes 20 newly purchased human beings, linked by chains, shepherded along the road by Proculus and his armed guards. They move slowly, many still weak from the sea voyage and their previous ordeals. For the first time, you walk among other slaves as one granted marginally higher status. You're not chained, you wear the household tunic rather than the rougher garments of the new purchases, and you're entrusted with tablets and records. This relative privilege feels simultaneously comforting and shameful. A young Greek man among the new slaves notices your different status and addresses you quietly in heavily accented Latin. You serve in the household? He asks. You nod, glancing nervously at Proculus, who marches ahead and doesn't notice the exchange. Is the master cruel? The question carries all the anxiety of someone whose fate hangs in uncertainty. You hesitate, searching for truth that won't crush hope entirely. He's like most Roman masters, not unnecessarily cruel, but he sees slaves as property, not people. Your treatment will depend on your usefulness. The man absorbs this with a stoic nod. I was a tutor in Athens before pirates took our ship. I taught mathematics and philosophy to children of good families. His voice catches. Now I'll teach Roman children how to subjugate minds as their fathers subjugate bodies. His bitter insight strikes at the heart of the system's self-perpetuation, how each generation of Roman elite is taught from childhood to view slavery as natural and necessary, often by the very people subjugated by the system. The journey continues through the day, stopping only briefly for water and rest. By evening, you've covered half the distance back to the estate. Proculus decides to make camp in a roadside clearing rather than risk traveling after dark with the valuable new cargo. The new slaves are secured for the night, given minimal food and water. You help distribute the rations, feeling the weight of their stares, some hostile, some pleading, some empty of emotion entirely. In their eyes, despite your shared bondage, you represent the system that now owns them. An elderly man in the group collapses while trying to eat his meager portion. He lies trembling on the ground, clearly ill from the journey, or perhaps conditions aboard the ship. Proculus examines him briefly with a frown. Useless, he declares. He won't make it to the estate, and if he does, he won't work. With clinical efficiency, Proculus draws his sword and ends the old man's life with a single thrust. The other new slaves watch in horror, but none dare protest. You turn away, stomach heaving, but force yourself to maintain composure. Recorded in the accounts, Proculus tells you, cleaning his blade. One asset lost in transit. The merchant guaranteed sound merchandise. Will claim compensation. That night, lying awake under the Italian stars, you confront the full brutality of the system you're enmeshed in. The casual killing of the elderly slave wasn't considered murder, legally or morally, by anyone empowered to judge such actions. It was a business decision, the disposal of damaged property, nothing more. For all the differences in treatment between household and field slaves, between skilled and unskilled, between the relatively privileged and utterly expendable, one truth remains constant. No slave is ever truly safe. No slave is ever truly a person in the eyes of this society. The moments of kindness, the small comforts, the occasional path to freedom through manumission, these are all contingent privileges that exist alongside the fundamental reality that a slave's life holds value only to the extent it provides benefit to an owner. As you drift toward troubled sleep, you understand more deeply why a modern person would struggle to survive in this ancient system of bondage. It's not just the physical hardships, though those are substantial. It's the psychological weight of existing without personhood, without rights, without the most basic protections that modern societies provide, even to their most disadvantaged members. The Roman world, for all its achievements in law, governance, engineering, and culture, built its prosperity on an institution that denied humanity to millions, and participating in that system, even as a victim, required a fundamental adjustment of values and expectations that no modern person could make without sacrificing the very core of their identity, their belief in their inherent worth as a human being. Morning comes too soon. The surviving new slaves are roused before dawn, given water but no food, and the journey continues. By late afternoon, you reach the estate where the human merchandise will be assigned to their new functions. Some will join the field, gangs. Others will serve in the household, and a few with specialized skills might receive more desirable positions. As you complete the accounting records in Marcus's office that evening, noting the inventory acquisition with clinical precision, you find your hand trembling over the wax tablet. 2 weeks ago, you would have found it impossible to participate in such a process. Now you perform the task with only internal resistance, your outside conformity growing more convincing by the day. This, perhaps, is the most insidious danger of immersion in the slave system, not that you wouldn't survive, but that to survive, you might become someone your former self would no longer recognize. Someone who accepts the unacceptable as simply the way things are. someone who focuses on their relative privilege rather than the fundamental injustice that defines their existence. As you place the finished accounts on Marcus's desk, he gives you a rare nod of approval. "You've done well," he says. "The master will be pleased. We return to the city villa tomorrow. He's decided your skills are more valuable there." "Thank you," you reply automatically, the expected response of a grateful slave receiving the smallest affirmation. "You're learning quickly how things work," Marcus adds. "That's good. Acceptance makes survival possible. Remember that." His words follow you back to the slave quarters, where you prepare for the return journey to the city. Acceptance makes survival possible, but at what cost to the soul? This is the question you carry with you as you face another day in a world built on systematic dehumanization, a world where the strong dominate the weak, not as a perversion of society's values, but as their fullest expression. The journey back to the city villa takes place in the master's formal procession, a marked contrast to your Spartan trip to Ostia. This time, you travel as part of the household staff, walking alongside the master's carriage rather than trudging behind with chained new purchases. It's a small distinction that somehow feels significant, another step in your gradual absorption into the hierarchies of Roman slavery. As your party approaches the outskirts of Rome itself, the landscape transforms. Farms and rural estates give way to increasingly dense settlement. Humble roadside shrines to the Lares, the guardian spirits of travelers, appear more frequently. Traffic thickens with carts, riders, and pedestrians flowing toward the heart of the empire. "There," says Malia, who walks beside you in the procession. She points ahead where the road crests a hill. "Roma." The sight steals your breath. The eternal city sprawls across its famous 7 hills, a dense maze of buildings punctuated by monumental structures, temples with gleaming marble columns, the massive bulk of amphitheaters and bath complexes, triumphal arches celebrating military victories, and aqueducts carrying water to the teeming millions within the walls. Even from a distance, the scale dwarfs any ancient city you might have imagined. "Have you never seen Rome before?" asks Malia, noticing your awestruck expression. "Not like this," you answer truthfully. "It's said the city holds 1 million souls," she tells you. "People from every corner of the empire, and at least 1/3 of them are like us, slaves." This casual statistic brings the scale of Roman slavery into sharp focus. Not thousands, not tens of thousands, but hundreds of thousands of enslaved people living and working within this single city, an entire population larger than many modern cities, all denied their basic humanity under law and custom. As your procession continues toward the city, you pass elaborate tombs lining the road, final resting places for wealthy Romans who wanted their monuments visible to travelers. Between these grand structures are more modest graves, and occasionally you spot the mass burial pits where slaves and the poorest free people end their journeys through life. The city gates loom ahead, and your procession joins the stream of humanity flowing through them. Inside, Rome assaults your senses with its intensity. The narrow streets teem with people of every description. Shops and market stalls crowd the lower floors of tall apartment buildings, rising 5 or 6 stories high. The noise is overwhelming. Shouted conversations, braying donkeys, metal workers hammering, street vendors calling their wares, and the constant rumble of wooden cart wheels on stone streets, and the smells, cooking food, human waste, animals, incense from temples, smoke from workshops. Unlike sanitized modern cities, Rome exists in its full sensory intensity, without the filters of modern urban planning or hygiene standards. Stay close, Malia warns. It's easy to get lost, and slaves found wandering without purpose are assumed to be runaways. The villa lies in one of the more affluent areas of the city, set back from the chaotic streets behind high walls. As you pass through its gates, the noise of Rome diminishes, replaced by the familiar sounds of the household. It feels strangely like coming home, a disquieting realization that shows how quickly humans adapt to even the most abnormal circumstances. Tomorrow, you'll resume your duties with Marcus. Stephanos informs you after the master has been properly welcomed home by the household staff. Get rest tonight. City business is more complex than rural accounts. That night in the slave quarters, you're greeted with curiosity by those who remained behind during the rural excursion. They hunger for news and gossip from the countryside and Ostia. You share carefully edited versions of your experiences, omitting the most disturbing aspects, yet finding yourself unconsciously adopting the matter-of-fact tone of the Roman world when discussing slavery's realities. Livia, the Gallic woman with the young son, seeks you out specifically. "Did you see the new slaves brought from Ostia?" she asks quietly. "I heard there were Gauls among them. I always hope." She leaves the thought unfinished, but its meaning is clear. Every new slave might somehow be connected to the family she lost when her village was conquered. "No Gauls this time," you tell her gently. "Mostly Syrians and Greeks." She nods, disappointed but unsurprised. This, too, is part of the slave experience. The eternal hope for reconnection with lost loved ones, a hope that almost never materializes into reality. Families shattered by the slave trade rarely reunite, their members scattered across the vast empire, their individual fates unknown to one another. Morning comes, and with it a return to the rhythms of the urban household. You report to Marcus's office, where he immediately sets you to work on the complex accounts that track the master's various business ventures in the city. Unlike the relatively straightforward agricultural operations of the rural estate, these urban investments span a dizzying array of activities: rental properties in the city's apartment blocks, shares in trading ventures, lending operations charging interest on loans, and workshops producing everything from furniture to clothing. The master owns 6 apartment buildings in the Subura district, Marcus explains, showing you entries in the ledgers, mostly occupied by free plebeians who pay monthly rent. The buildings themselves are maintained and managed by slaves. The Subura was Rome's most densely populated district, home to ordinary working people living in cramped conditions. That the master would own property there while never setting foot in the neighborhood himself illustrates the economic reach of the wealthy beyond their visible lifestyles. He also has ownership stakes in 3 fulleries, Marcus continues, referring to the laundry and fabric processing establishments essential to Roman life. 20 slaves work in each, cleaning and treating togas and other garments. As the day progresses, you develop a clearer picture of how urban slavery differs from its rural counterpart. While agricultural slaves work in relative isolation on distant estates, urban slaves are integrated into every aspect of city life. They operate businesses, maintain infrastructure, produce goods, and provide endless services that keep Rome functioning. Yet despite their ubiquity, or perhaps because of it, urban slaves remain largely invisible as people to the free population around them. They are the background machinery of Roman society, noticed only when they malfunction. After several days of working with Marcus on the household accounts, you're sent on an errand that takes you back into the city streets. One of the master's rental properties has reported issues with water supply from the building's connection to the public aqueduct system. You're to deliver a message to the slave overseer who manages the building and return with his assessment of repairs needed. Stephanos assigns a young slave named Dion to accompany you. He knows the city streets, Stephanos explains. Follow his guidance. Dion, perhaps 14 years old, has the confident bearing of someone born and raised in Rome's complex, urban environment. As you leave the villa and navigate the crowded streets together, he offers a running commentary on the city around you. That's the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus. He points to a massive structure crowning one of Rome's hills. And there's the Circus Maximus where the chariot races happen. The master sometimes takes favored household slaves there on festival days. The streets grow narrower and more crowded as you leave the affluent district behind and enter more working-class neighborhoods. Apartment buildings rise on either side, creating shadowed canyons where sunlight barely reaches the street level. People of all descriptions crowd the narrow walkways: craftsmen, day laborers, street vendors, and slaves on various errands. Stay alert here, Dion warns as you enter a particularly crowded marketplace. Pickpockets target those who look distracted or unfamiliar with the city. As he speaks, a commotion erupts ahead. A crowd gathers around a wooden platform where a man in official-looking attire stands beside a line of chained individuals. A slave auction in progress. The market for cheap urban labor, Dion explains, noticing your attention. Not like the fancy slave markets where household servants and skilled workers are sold. These are mostly laborers for the dirtiest jobs: sewer maintenance, carrying night soil, tannery work. You pause to watch the proceedings, struck by how different this rough auction is from the careful selection process you witnessed in Ostia. Here, there's little individual assessment of skills or potential. The auctioneer barely describes each person before starting the bidding. Prices are low, reflecting the disposable nature of the labor being purchased. Healthy male, good for 5 years of work at least, the auctioneer calls, pushing forward a middle-aged man with calloused hands and a resigned expression. Starts at 5,000 sesterces. The bidding is quick and unenthusiastic, ending at just 6,200 sesterces, about a fifth of what your master paid for you with your claimed literacy and accounting potential. The man is led away by his new owner, a contractor who supplies labor for building projects. Come on, Dion urges. We shouldn't linger too long. The message needs delivery. You continue through increasingly humble streets until reaching the apartment building, an insulae of 5 stories with shops on the ground floor and increasingly small apartments on the upper levels. The building's overseer, a slave named Alexander, greets you with the weary expression of someone perpetually solving problems beyond his control. Another cistern crack, he explains after reading the message you've delivered. Third one this year. The aqueduct water pressure is too high for these old pipes. As he writes a response detailing the repairs needed, you observe the operations of the building. Slave attendants maintain the common areas, remove waste, and assist residents with various tasks. Other slaves run the shops on the ground floor, a bakery, a cobbler, and a wine shop, all owned by your master but operated by his entrepreneurial human property. These shop slaves have it decent, Dion tells you quietly, following your gaze. They keep a percentage of profits as their peculium, enough success, and they might buy their freedom eventually. This form of quasi-independent slave labor represents yet another variation in the complex spectrum of Roman servitude. These slaves experience a simulacrum of free business ownership while still ultimately working for their master's benefit. Their limited autonomy comes with heightened responsibility. Failure to generate sufficient profit would result in reassignment to less desirable positions. With Alexander's response in hand, you and Dion begin the return journey to the villa. Your path takes you along streets where various urban trades operate in open workshops. Blacksmiths, potters, weavers, and carpenters ply their crafts in spaces open to public view. In many shops, you notice slaves working alongside free laborers, often indistinguishable in their tasks, if not their legal status. Most skilled trades use both slave and free labor, Dion explains, sometimes working side by side at the same tasks for the same hours. The difference is that one gets paid wages while the other works only for food and shelter. This economic reality underpins much of the tension in Roman society. Free workers must compete with slave labor, driving down wages and opportunities. Some free citizens, unable to support themselves, eventually sell themselves into slavery as a last resort against starvation, choosing survival over freedom. As you near a major crossroads, a different kind of procession appears, a funeral cortege for a wealthy citizen. Professional mourners wail dramatically while musicians play solemn tunes. Behind them, slaves carry the deceased on an elaborate bier, followed by family members wearing appropriate expressions of grief. More slaves follow, bearing funeral offerings and portraits of the deceased's ancestors. Even in death, you're attended by slaves, Dion observes dryly. The very rich have servants killed or sacrificed to accompany them to the afterlife, though that's less common now than in earlier times. The casual reference to funeral sacrifices, human beings killed to serve their masters beyond death, underscores how completely the commodification of human life permeates Roman thinking. Even the boundary between life and death doesn't limit the mastery of owner over slave in the Roman worldview. You return to the villa with Alexander's message, completing your errand successfully. The brief excursion into the wider city has provided a window into urban slavery's diverse manifestations, from the relatively privileged shop managers to the expendable laborers purchased at bare minimum prices. That evening, an unusual announcement spreads through the slave quarters. Tomorrow, the master will host games at the local amphitheater to celebrate his daughter's betrothal to the senator's son. The entire household staff will attend as part of the family's retinue, displaying the master's wealth and status through the number and quality of his human property. We must appear at our best, Stephanos instructs, inspecting each slave critically. Clean tunics, properly groomed, no visible injuries. You represent the master's dignity. The next morning, the household assembles in formal procession. You're positioned with the accounting and administrative slaves, a middle-tier placement that reflects your gradually rising status within the household hierarchy. Ahead are the master's personal body servants and specialized attendants. Behind are the kitchen staff and general laborers. The amphitheater stands as one of Rome's many monuments to both engineering prowess and fascination with violence as entertainment. Smaller than the famed Colosseum, but still impressive, the structure rises in tiered seating around a central arena where various spectacles unfold for public enjoyment. Your master's family and their guests occupy a privileged section with comfortable seating and shade from the sun. You and the other slaves stand in designated areas behind them, visible as part of their entourage, but not permitted to sit in their presence. The day's entertainment begins with animal hunts. Exotic beasts from across the empire driven into the arena to be killed by specialized venators, hunters who make their living through public performance of slaughter. Lions, bears, and even a rhinoceros meet their ends to the roaring approval of the crowd. Most of the beast hunters are free men, whispers an older slave standing near you. But some are slaves trained specifically for the arena. Either way, few survive more than a few years in the profession. Following the animal hunts come the gladiatorial contests, the main attraction that has drawn thousands of spectators to the amphitheater. You've known about these famous fights intellectually, from history books and films in your time, but nothing prepares you for the visceral reality of watching actual human beings fight to serious injury or death for public entertainment. The gladiators enter the arena in ceremonial procession, each representing different fighting styles with distinctive armor and weapons. Some are heavily protected but slow-moving, others lightly armored but agile. They salute the sponsor of the games, your master, with the famous phrase, Ave, morituri te salutant. Hail, those who are about to die salute you. Not all fights are to the death, explains your informant, noting your distress. Many end when one fighter is clearly defeated. Death happens, but it's not always the purpose. This cold comfort does little to ease the moral horror of watching human beings forced into mortal combat for spectators' amusement. As the fighting begins, you force yourself to observe rather than turn away, feeling an obligation to witness this aspect of Roman slavery at its most spectacular and disturbing. The skill of the gladiators is undeniable. Years of intensive training in specialized schools, the ludi, have turned them into martial artists of extraordinary ability. Their movements are precise, tactical, and disciplined. These are not brawlers, but professionals executing techniques honed through endless practice and previous combat experience. But beneath the spectacle lies the fundamental reality. Most gladiators are slaves fighting under compulsion, their lives and deaths determined by the whims of the crowd and the thumb of the presiding official. Some gladiators are condemned criminals serving a punishment worse than quick execution. Others are prisoners of war who once fought for their homeland's freedom against Rome, now paradoxically fighting for Romans' entertainment. A surprisingly complex culture surrounds the gladiatorial contests. The crowd clearly has favorites, calling out names of renowned fighters. Betting is rampant among spectators. Some gladiators have achieved celebrity status, their exploits commemorated in graffiti throughout the city. Between matches, you notice something unexpected. Female gladiators taking the arena for exhibition matches. These gladiatresses, as they're called, draw particular interest from the crowd. Like their male counterparts, they're mostly slaves trained in combat techniques, though some are free women who have chosen this dangerous profession for the potential rewards of victory. The emperor restricted women fighting publicly, someone explains, but private games like these still feature them. Some aristocratic women even train in gladiatorial arts as an exotic hobby, though they'd never actually fight in the arena. As the day progresses, the matches become increasingly elaborate. Specialized fighters recreate famous historical battles. Others take on multiple opponents simultaneously. The sand of the arena grows dark with blood, raked and covered with fresh sand between bouts. During one particularly intense match, a fighter goes down with a serious but non-fatal wound. The crowd's reaction will determine his fate. Thumb up for life, thumb down for death. The wounded gladiator raises his hand in the customary request for mercy. The crowd seems divided until your master, as the game's sponsor, makes the definitive gesture, thumb down. The victorious gladiator looks to him for confirmation, then efficiently delivers the killing blow to his defeated opponent. The casual power over human life demonstrated in that simple gesture, a thumb's direction determining whether a man lives or dies, crystallizes everything about Roman slavery's fundamental inhumanity. This public execution, performed as entertainment, receives the same enthusiastic approval from the crowd as a particularly exciting play in a modern sporting event. You feel physically ill but dare not show it. Around you, other household slaves watch with varying reactions, some genuinely enjoying the spectacle, others maintaining careful masks of appropriate interest, a few looking away when possible. Even among the enslaved, There's no unified moral response to the cruelty they witness. Each has adapted differently to survive within the system that oppresses them. The games continue through the afternoon and conclude with a lavish public feast provided by your master for attendees of certain social rank. Slaves serve the food and wine, clear debris, and maintain order throughout. The spectators discuss the day's contests with the animated interest of modern sports fans, debating the merits of different fighting styles and recounting particularly dramatic moments. As the household slaves prepare for the procession back to the villa, you notice a small commotion near the gladiators' exit from the arena. A group of young women from wealthy families crowd around, hoping for acknowledgement from the surviving fighters. Despite gladiators' legal status as infamous among the lowest social ranks, they hold an undeniable romantic appeal for some Roman women, attracted to their physical prowess and the danger they represent. Those women risk their reputations, comments Dion, who has ended up near you in the assembled household staff. Being publicly associated with gladiators can damage a respectable woman's standing, yet they don't seem concerned, you observe. The rules are always different for the wealthy, he replies, with the resigned wisdom of someone who has observed Roman society from its margins. They can break conventions that would ruin those of lower status. The week following the games brings a significant event to the household, the formal engagement ceremony between the master's daughter and the senator's son. The villa transforms for the celebration, with every slave working extended hours to prepare the elaborate decorations, food, and accommodations for distinguished guests. You're assigned to assist Marcus with the substantial financial records related to the event, tallying expenses, recording gifts, and documenting the dowry arrangements. The sheer wealth-changing hands for this single social alliance would support hundreds of ordinary families for years. During these preparations, you become aware of another dimension of Roman slavery through observations and whispered conversations, the sexual vulnerability of slaves within the household. Livia, the Gallic woman with the young son, is selected to serve as a personal attendant to one of the male guests expected for the celebration. Her reaction, a carefully composed exterior, barely concealing obvious dread, tells a story that needs no elaboration. "It happens often?" you ask Amalia quietly, after seeing Livia's response to the assignment. "For the younger, more attractive slaves?" "Yes," she answers. "It's considered a master's right to use his property however he wishes. Some are more restrained than others, but guests often expect such accommodations." Roman law recognized no concept of rape when the victim was a slave. A slave had no legal right to refuse their body's use, whether for labor or sexual gratification. This absolute power over physical autonomy represented slavery's most intimate violation, the denial of the most basic bodily sovereignty. The engagement celebration spans 3 days of elaborate feasting, entertainment, and social networking among Rome's elite. You observe from the margins, performing your assigned tasks while witnessing the complex social dance of the upper classes. Political alliances form and dissolve over wine. Business deals worth fortunes conclude with casual handshakes. Marriage arrangements for children barely past puberty are negotiated between families seeking advantageous connections, and throughout, slaves facilitate everything, invisible until needed, then performing their functions with the expected efficiency before fading back into the background. The entire elaborate social system functions on their unacknowledged labor. On the celebration's final evening, an unexpected incident disrupts the carefully choreographed proceedings. A slave belonging to one of the guests collapses while serving wine, the heavy silver pitcher crashing to the floor and splashing several dignitaries with expensive Falernian wine. The reaction is immediate and violent. The guest, enraged by his slave's clumsiness and the embarrassment it caused, begins beating him savagely in front of the assembled company. No one intervenes or even seems particularly disturbed by this display. Some guests look away out of delicate sensibilities, but none questions the owner's right to punish his property however he sees fit. You watch in horror as the beating continues, well beyond any proportionate response to the offense. The slave, already ill or exhausted before his collapse, offers no resistance. When he loses consciousness, his owner delivers several more blows before being gently encouraged by the host to allow household slaves to remove the offending servant. "Take this worthless dog out of my sight," the owner spits. "If he lives, sell him to the mines. I don't want to see his face again." 2 household slaves drag the unconscious man from the triclinium as servants quickly clean the spilled wine, and the celebration resumes as if nothing significant has occurred. The incident rates barely a momentary disruption in the evening's festivities. Later, you learn the slave's fate from Dion, who helped remove him. "He died before we reached the slave's quarters," Dion reports flatly. The master ordered the body disposed of immediately to avoid disrupting the celebration's mood. "And the guest who killed him?" you ask, already knowing the answer. "What about him? A master can destroy his own property without consequence. It's unfortunate. Good slaves are valuable, but perfectly legal." This incident, perhaps more than any gladiatorial spectacle or public punishment, demonstrates the fundamental reality of Roman slavery that made it unbearable from a modern moral perspective. It wasn't just the physical hardship or even the denial of freedom, but the complete absence of recognition as a human being with inherent worth. A slave could be destroyed on a momentary impulse, their death less significant than the breaking of a valuable vase, regrettable only for the financial loss involved. In the weeks that follow, you continue your work in the household, becoming increasingly proficient in your assigned duties. The master, pleased with your performance, grants you small privileges, better food, occasional rest periods, even a new tunic of slightly higher quality than the standard slave garment. These minor improvements in your condition bring conflicted feelings. The relative comfort is welcome, yet you recognize how the system co-opts those within it through selective rewards. Each small privilege binds you more tightly to your position, encouraging you to focus on individual advancement within the slave hierarchy, rather than questioning the fundamental injustice of the institution itself. You also notice how your perception of time has changed. The relentless daily rhythm of servitude, waking before dawn, working until after sunset, sleeping only to repeat the cycle, creates a narrowed focus on immediate survival. Long-term thinking becomes a luxury your circumstances don't permit. Like other slaves, you find yourself living day by day, measuring success by the avoidance of punishment rather than any positive achievement. This psychological adaptation, this narrowing of temporal perspective and lowering of expectations, represents one of slavery's most profound effects on the human mind. Modern people, accustomed to planning their lives years in advance, pursuing personal goals, and expecting continuous improvement, would find this constricted mental state nearly impossible to maintain without severe psychological damage. One morning, approximately 2 months after your mysterious arrival in ancient Rome, you're summoned unexpectedly to the master's study. Your heart races with the usual fear such summons provokes. Have you made an error in the accounts? Has someone reported some overlooked offense? You find the master in conversation with a visitor, a scholar by his dress, perhaps a philosopher or teacher judging by the scrolls visible in his satchel. They pause their discussion as you enter and kneel in the expected posture of a slave awaiting instructions. "This is the one I mentioned," your master tells his visitor, literate, quick with figures, and adapting well to household routine despite only recent enslavement. The visitor studies you with academic interest. "May I question him?" Your master nods permission, and the visitor addresses you directly. "What do you know of philosophy? Have you read Plato, Aristotle, the Stoics?" The question is dangerous. Too much knowledge would be suspicious in a slave. Too little would diminish your value. You choose a careful middle path. "I know of them, Domini, though I have not had the privilege of studying their works deeply." And what do you believe happens to a slave's soul after death? Is it different from a free man's fate? This metaphysical question catches you off guard. It seems to probe at something beyond casual curiosity. "I believe all souls face the same judges in the afterlife," you answer carefully. "Our earthly status matters little to the gods." The visitor nods thoughtfully before turning back to your master. "He'll do nicely for my purposes. The agreed price is fair." With a shock, you realize what's happening. You're being sold. Your master has decided to part with your services, transferring your ownership to this scholarly stranger. Despite knowing that you hold no right to stability or choice in your situation, the sudden change provokes profound anxiety. "You'll serve Gaius Plinius Secundus now," your master informs you matter-of-factly. "He requires an educated slave to assist with his research and writing. Consider yourself fortunate. It's a position better suited to your abilities than mere accounting." Gaius Plinius Secundus. The name strikes you with astonishing recognition. In your time, he was known as Pliny the Elder, the famous Roman author, natural philosopher, and naval commander whose encyclopedic natural history would become one of ancient Rome's most important surviving works. The man who would tragically die in 79 CE while investigating the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. This unexpected connection to a historically significant figure momentarily disorients you. For the first time since your arrival in ancient Rome, you encounter something that bridges your previous life and your current reality, a name from history books now attached to a living person who stands before you. Within hours, your few possessions are gathered, and you're escorted from the villa that has been your home for these past months. The other slaves bid brief farewells. Emotional attachments are dangerous luxuries in lives characterized by sudden separations. Even Malia, who has shown you consistent kindness, offers only a quick embrace and whispered wishes for good fortune. Your new master's home proves to be a modest but comfortable villa near the Campus Martius. Unlike the ostentatious wealth of your previous household, this residence reflects scholarly pursuits rather than social ambition. The atrium contains busts of philosophers and poets rather than ancestors. The walls bear painted scenes of scientific and historical subjects instead of mythological displays. Most striking is the library, a room dedicated entirely to scrolls organized carefully on shelves, with reading tables positioned to catch the best natural light. Here, Pliny explains, you'll spend most of your time assisting his ongoing project. "I document everything of interest in the natural world," he tells you with evident passion. "Plants, animals, minerals, celestial phenomena, human inventions and customs, all knowledge worth preserving. Your duties will include reading to me, taking dictation, organizing notes, and occasionally accompanying me to observe specimens." This assignment represents yet another variation in the spectrum of Roman slavery, intellectual rather than physical labor, serving the advancement of knowledge rather than personal comfort or economic production. Yet the fundamental relationship remains unchanged. You are still property, your skills and mind now owned by a different master. In the days that follow, you settle into new routines in Pliny's household. The work proves engaging despite your status. You read aloud from Greek and Latin texts, while Pliny takes notes for his encyclopedia. You organize his observations on subjects ranging from astronomy to zoology. You accompany him to examine unusual plants in private gardens or rare artifacts in wealthy collectors' homes.